The awakening you. The answers are within.
Welcome to the Awakening You podcast, reminding you that the answers are within. My name is Scott Goyette, and I am your host. Each week in this podcast, I will be sharing some simple yet very useful tools to help you dive deep and discover how infinitely powerful you really are. The show is based on specific growth models created by the Go Love Now movement that will help you choose love and move through your fears. The love model, LOVE, stands for listening, observing, voicing, and empathizing. The fear model, FEAR, stands for forgiving, eliminating outdated beliefs, accepting yourself and others, and rising up and becoming resilient. During each podcast, my amazing guests will share their experiences with using these tools and how you might benefit from using them as well. All information shared during this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. Nothing from this podcast should supersede the directions of a doctor or mental health professional. So today we are here talking about observe, and observe is the second letter in the love model. And we're not talking about just observing, but being an active versus a passive observer. Last week, we had an amazing guest, and her name was Michelle Lyon. And Michelle and I were speaking about listening more closely to your heart and listening to those who are trying to serve you. So we were able to uncover some ways that we can really connect more with our intuitive self and then find those angels who are out there in our existence that we don't always do a great job of connecting with, but they're there for us. Today, as we jump into talking about the O, the active observer, I have a very special guest and good friend of mine. He is a Colorado CrossFit coach. He's also a life coach, and he believes that we make our world better by looking at the changes we can make in ourselves. Today, I welcome you with Versell Wells. Versell, how are you, brother?
I am well, sir. How are you?
I'm doing good. And so you're up in Colorado. What a beautiful place to be this time of year.
It is, man. I was actually planning on going to Sedalia to do some hiking right when I leave here.
I love it. That sounds good. And I'm jealous. I'll be up there in a month to do some of the same myself. Tell us a little bit about who you are, where you came from, and what brought you to where you are in life right now.
That's always a tough question to ask, because where do I start?
Why don't we start when you're a kid? Where are you from?
Okay. I am from Denver, Colorado-ish. My mother is a military woman. She is still in the United States Army. So between here, where we have family in Colorado, we also have a lot of her side of the family in Kansas City. So I grew up with some Midwest values, as well as being here in Denver, where it's a little bit more progressive. And moving back and forth, I've lived in, it almost became a joke. We moved probably every 6 to 8 months, whether it was poverty or later on in life, it became the being deployed, but it was usually something. Change became the norm. So I learned how to be the new guy. I went to 5 high schools and 3 colleges, finally got a degree in public relations from Southern Wesleyan University. And I only got the degree because my basketball career eligibility was over. I wanted to become a strength coach because I had no idea. Graduating college wasn't really what people from my family did. I just didn't know any better. You ever had that happen to you where you keep going because you didn't realize that you weren't supposed to be here? It's kind of like when sports announcers talk about how rookies do. Like, they don't know the gravity of the situation. So I would pass my classes. And when people would ask, my advisor would ask, hey, so what do you want these classes to go toward? I don't know. I'm still eligible, right? They're like, of course, you have a 3.5. Yes, you're eligible. So my experience is not really having a home base a lot of times, but learning to embrace change and make strangers become friends. I consider myself these days as a coach and a teacher. I like to use my experience to help others get to where they are. I teach people from a bunch of different backgrounds, mostly more stable, what they would consider stable than my own, in order to teach them how to adapt, because you'd be surprised at how much people hate change. For me, it was the norm, so I never learned to fear it. It was always a new school system, new teachers, new friends, new everything. But you change anything for most people, and they have a meltdown. So I'd say that's one great thing from my upbringing that I believe my mom taught me.
I love it. I'm hearing a couple things there. I'm hearing, first of all, that you were always the new guy, which really kind of forces you to be a chameleon. And I can fully relate to that. Not so much that I was always the new guy, but I'd always try new things, new sports, different events. And so oftentimes I'd play different roles from different places that I was. The other thing that I heard you talking about was almost a resilience that was just built into you, and you weren't even sure what was happening, but you understood change was imminent, and change comes into growth because you kept moving forward and building. And now you're teaching some of those things as a coach, whether it's for mind, body, or spirit through CrossFit or your coaching. That's pretty cool. I like it. And then the other thing I really want to tie this into is, so you're sitting there in a space where everything in your life is constantly moving, it's constantly changing, and you've accepted that the world is that way. But how many of us do we sit and we just watch things going on around us, and we're so horrified of change that we become that passive observer? We do nothing to enable the world to grow. Tell me some situations in your life where you've specifically seen other people or yourself being that passive observer and not being an active observer, and what could have been done differently.
What I've learned throughout my personal and professional development is that people change for two reasons: inspiration or desperation. It's kind of like one of my favorite Les Brown stories. He tells a story about a dog who's lying on a porch next to his owner, groaning in pain. Day after day, he groaned. Then finally, the guy decides to ask the owner of the dog why he's groaning in pain. The owner says, "Oh, he's just lying on a nail." The guy looks at the owner curiously and asks the obvious question, "Why doesn't he get up off the nail?" The owner responds, "I don't know. I guess it's because it's not hurting yet enough to inspire him to get up." This is exactly why most people don't become active observers, because it doesn't hurt them personally bad enough to change something. It's not good, but it's not horrible. So I'm not going to move. I'm not going to change anything. A personal story, I can go back to my college days and talk about athletics. That's how I relate to just about everything. I knew that my college basketball team wasn't going to change. We were talented, but we would lose, and nobody on the team knew how to be a leader. I know for a fact that our team changed, the fate of our team changed, and we went deep into the playoffs based on the fact that I stepped up. It wasn't like an official thing. I don't believe I was even a captain, but the day that I started going the extra mile as the best player on the team is when things started to change for us. I became active. I actually started to care, and other people could see it, and the team changed. The way that we interacted with each other, both on and off the court, changed. That's the difference between as far as active versus passive.
I love it. I love it. I love that. One thing I wanted to bring up too that I really like when hearing that, and I know we've talked about this before, but it's very interesting when we're in a team environment and one person really steps up. And I think one of the things that I do, and tell me if you do the same thing, is I try to look at the idea of self as not just me, but as everything, the entire team and the whole concept of basketball. So if I were to be on the court, I really start to think of what is everybody experiencing in this moment. And in doing that and realizing that this is fully a team game and not thinking, what am I going to do? But how is the team going to be in the best place to win the game? It's amazing what starts to happen. One story I remember, I don't know if you remember Red Auerbach, but Red Auerbach was one of the best basketball coaches of all time. I was at his camp years ago in 8th grade. And I remember the final game of the camp, there was this one guy who just kept missing every single pass I threw to him. 3 passes in a row he missed and bounced out of bounds, right in his hands. And I'll never forget, everyone was talking about this guy was going to go to the NBA and he was going to be so amazing. And I remember Red Auerbach staring at me every single time the guy would miss the pass and I'd mumble something under my breath. And at halftime, Red Auerbach comes up to me and he looks at me, he goes, son, was that a good pass you threw, that first pass? And I said, it was right in his hands. He goes, you're right. Was that second pass a good pass? And I'm like, yeah, it was right in his hands. He's like, mm-hmm. He goes, was that third pass a good pass? Before I could even answer, he already put that old man finger into my chest, and he just jammed it into me. He goes, you're an a-hole if you think that was a good pass. And I had no clue what he meant. But at that point, I started to realize something. If I keep throwing the ball to somebody on my team to say that I'm doing the right thing and not really worrying if they can't catch the pass in that day, that's not me being an active observer. That's somebody who's being very selfish, and it's only about me. And he understood at that moment the concept of team needed to be instilled in kids like me. And that's the things I want to do in all of us. Yeah, how do we really become that active observer and team and everything we do, not just sports? So outside of sports, you had told me a little bit about your fiance and an instance that happened at an event. What was it, in Indiana?
Yes, in Indiana.
Tell me a little more about that.
We were actually at an event in Indiana with some people that my fiance had grown up with. Brianna has been going through some training about having courageous conversations about race. There are plenty of opportunities in everyone's life to step up and say something. And Brianna is white. I mean, just for clarity, she grew up there, and there are a lot of people who just don't know any better. They aren't necessarily racist. They haven't educated themselves about how people from other backgrounds, how they interact with the world. They just don't know. They're just ignorant. There were people making a joke that was kind of borderline, but not necessarily offensive. When you saw her face turn when they made the joke, as she turns around and explained it to them why it was not okay for them to do so, you could see that she didn't reach out to offend, and you could see their minds were actually changing, or at least the door was open, because it was somebody that they had a relationship with, somebody that they cared about, that was willing to step up and have this courageous conversation. It's a door that she could walk through that I could never. I didn't have the credibility with those people. They don't know me. They don't care about me. Not to say that they're bad people. They just didn't grow up with me. But she was able to go into a completely different realm that I was not. And I was extremely proud of her, because she grew up learning to not ruffle feathers. She grew up in California, and she would say things to me such as, I don't see color. And it's not offensive when people say things like that, but it is also not the right way, in my opinion, because to not see people's color is to not value their experience. If I think my experience is the exact same as someone who's first generation here from whatever country they might be from, whether we're the same skin color or not, I'm invalidating their experience. To say that I don't see color is to say that I don't see you. So yes, there are differences. We should embrace those. But it was interesting seeing her become an active observer, when before she would have just ignored that and rolled her eyes as people being stupid, or Midwest being Midwest.
And that is so powerful. It's so beautiful to see, because let's face it, when we were kids and we were in the hallways and some kid was bullying somebody, we've grown up with a little bit of fear. I mean, what if we support that kid that was being picked on, and now we're the ones picked on? And a lot of people are feeling that. And that's the complicit nature of the passive observer. We're driven by fear. Let's step out of some personal experiences and even move into the macro of the world and things that are going on right now. We have a lot of division in our country, and we have a lot of division in the world. And if you really go to the root of it, it really looks like a lot of people are trying to really be driven and run by love, and other people are reactively being driven by fear. And because of this, we have a large group of people sitting in the middle who are being very complicit, saying, oh, it's just what it is. So what do we do in our country or any country in the world to make sure that we don't have things like Hitler ever happening again? Because one of the things that happened there, it's a slow process where people are driving more and more fear into somebody. And once we have fear, it's very difficult to shift from passive to active observer. True? So what do we do? And this is a discussion for both of us. What do we do to make sure that as citizens of the U.S., citizens of the world, human beings, how do we make sure atrocities never happen again because we don't fall into that permanent passive space?
The first thing that we can do is look at ourselves and treat our neighbors well. That's the very first thing. Like, you start at the smallest. You start with yourself, and you start with the people that you impact, because one person can rarely get to the level where they can change everything. The second thing is stop normalizing bad behavior. If someone is a bully, if someone is taking shots at some other person, we need to stop that. Just like we're kids in the schoolyard, like, being active is getting in front of that. Even if you get punched in the face, we need to let go of our ego. Like, being passive is allowing somebody else to get bullied as long as it's not me. There are many instances, and in Nazi Germany, they weren't the majority, but there were a lot of people who turned a blind eye to what was going on, and then it was too late. Like, we need to stop with the whole, hey, as long as they're not racist toward me, I'm good. My family's fine. If someone isn't free, none of us are. If someone is discriminated against, all of us are. If we start seeing it that way, things change, because it's not just we other people, and we sit in echo chambers where people believe just like us, and they come from backgrounds just like ours. They only echo the things that we want to hear. Yeah, I mean, I've been on your Facebook page, and it's sometimes, whether it be one or two people, it becomes a cesspool of misinformation. And that's all it is, just bad ideas. But the person or the people who perpetuate these ideas, they get so involved in them because it's so emotional to them, because nobody pulls them aside and approaches them with love and says, hey, maybe you want to see it this way.
It's so true.
They instantly become defensive, and they're ready to fight, whether it's words on a keyboard or physically fight. They become combative because this challenges their thinking, and not in a way that they want.
There's so much truth to that, because one of the things that, I do through social media is I really try to get two groups to have a conversation, and it's definitely a social experiment, because oftentimes it fails, as you've said, and there's a few people I had to remove from those conversations because there's really no way to stop them when they're from afar. When they're up close and personal, we can have some great conversations. So with that being said, let's think about this too. There's so many great things about social media. We have such an opportunity to learn. We have such an opportunity to create new perspective from all we've learned. We have an opportunity to converse with people that have different perspectives that we otherwise might not if we don't have the luxury or the money to travel. But at the same time, now we've got that keyboard warrior mentality, because if we have differing opinions, it's very easy to attack.
There are two things that I could say about that. And if you don't want to record this one, I would 100% agree. I believe more people need to be punched in the face.
I get that.
That's not even a joke. And
I agree.
Growing up on the schoolyard, as kids play and things get aggressive or whatever, and there's no adults around, I believe we need that experience. I believe we need to know that actions do have consequences. And sometimes those consequences are this kid punching me in the face for going too far. Sometimes pushing the limit. There needs to be some sort of system of checks and balances. And I believe you need to learn that early. Because if I have an idea that this man might just punch me in the face, perhaps I would tend not to be so disrespectful to him via keyboard, via he can never get me because he doesn't have my IP address, or I have a flag or something as my avatar, so he'll never get me. Well, what if he did? People remember their first time getting punched in the face and waking up with having to pick themselves off the ground with dirt all over them. You remember that. Those are deep-seated memories. Not that adults should go do the same thing, but having that in your brain, like, hey, maybe I should treat this situation with a little bit more respect, should probably be instilled early. We don't have that. Our generation is different. I believe that's where we get the internet, keyboard warrior. And what you were saying about social media, at this point, the way that we use it, I'm not so sure that it's a good thing. I believe we have access to information, but I believe we don't use it correctly. We don't use it for positive. We use it in a spirit of comparison and to normalize bad ideas. I believe anti-social media is the reason a fan to the flames of people's anxiety problems and depression because we don't know how much better someone our exact age is doing. The Forbes 30 under 30, the 20 under 20, or even the people who go on vacations and post them all. There are people who post fake vacations. There's a service to do so, post fake vacations just to get you to believe that they've got more money than I do. So social media is fanning these flames and taking away from us doing what we would rather do, which is get to know each other.
That's some really, really, really great insight. One of the things I've really been thinking about myself is there's two things that drive me crazy that we've always got to say, well, that person, that type of person. Now, some of my friends or people that I know will say, well, you other. And here's the deal. The people I disassociate with or can't handle or manage, I still love them, but I need to love them from afar because I don't condone their behavior. And like you said, there's a time and a place where somebody has to have a consequence. And sometimes the consequence might be a punch in the face. Sometimes the consequence is I'm not going to speak to you at this point in your life because there's no value for me and the energy is just not good. The other thing is, and this is a tough one to really wrap our heads around. I mentioned it earlier when I was talking about Red Auerbach. But the other thing is, what if we really just looked at self as every being, all humanity? We don't have to look at that every single time we think of what am I going to eat today as this big picture self. But if I really thought when I was making my decisions, is this a decision that would help Versell? Is this a decision that would help my friends back in Boston? Is this a decision that's good for someone in the Amazon right now? And at the end of the day, very few of us are doing that. And I went on a trip around the world this past year and got to see many different perspectives of many different people. The more you travel, the more you realize the most beautiful part of going to different countries is the people and breaking bread with your own brothers and sisters. And when you start to see the commonalities, you realize you're all suffering, which is a choice. We're all going to feel pain. How we suffer is a choice. And all people are beautiful at heart. And the more we move and the more we see and the more we connect, not in the space of hiding in social media, but like you said, one-on-one connections, you just start to fall in love with humanity. And I think we've lost that. And so I agree, stepping outside, meeting our neighbors, going to community centers, being involved in groups, just being friends with your own family and neighbors, that's really where we need to start. And we're not doing it.
Yeah, that's the craziest part about it. As you were talking, I was thinking about the with the story you told, it's not a good pass unless somebody catches it. I played quarterback growing up, and it's not a perfect pass unless it hits your receiver. So it can look as good as you want it to. If it's not complete, what did you really do? You fed your ego. Like Peyton Manning, one of my favorite of all time, the great Bronco.
For a year.
He threw the ugliest passes, but they got there and the receiver caught. So was it really an ugly pass? What were we looking for? Was it supposed to be a perfect spiral, or did his receiver catch it in the end zone? Because that's the goal.
Why don't we finish up on this? Let's think of some little tidbits that we can offer to our listeners to really step up and be that passive observer. So far, I've heard from you, it's going to be scary. There's going to be some fear involved. I mean, you might even take a punch in the face. And
take a punch in the face.
And honestly, like there's very few of us who want that. I don't think any of us said, let's do this today. Let's go get punched in the face to make some change. But here's the deal. Just imagine if somebody or a group of people see you receive pain because you believed enough in something. What does that look like to that group, and how quickly does that amplify? I mean, Martin Luther King, Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, we can go on and on. There's so many people that would have taken any kind of pain to make sure that the change occurred. And we all have the capacity in us, and it might not feel good, but we really need to do it to advance humanity.
I believe people need to see more of it just in our everyday lives. As you and I were talking before recording, people respond better to personal testimony and the story. Gandhi, they don't have a personal relationship with. Martin Luther King, at this point, is an icon, and much respect to everything that he did in the civil rights movement and getting people's attention. But you or I can have more impact on a child, a person, an adult, anyone because we're physically there. If they see us willing to take the proverbial punch to the face, it's more meaningful, in my opinion, than hearing about Martin Luther King spending the time in jail because they don't have a relationship with it. If they don't see you because you made a sacrifice and were gone for a couple of days or something like that, or you actually put yourself through something, you have a more personal testimony that will resonate a lot better than something that happened in Selma, Alabama 50 years ago.
You know, I'm 100% with you. And what I'm hearing right there is even the name of our show. It's The Awakening You, The Answers Are Within. And so I'm not looking to Martin Luther King or Gandhi or any religious figure or anybody who's been a martyr, because those people are great for us to look and say, hey, that's the kind of person I want to be like. But all that is a model for us to go out and do it. It's all it is. It's all it's ever been. And so the day we start taking action and realizing that we have the power within ourselves, until we do that, change will never be made, and we will become another group of passive observers. We've got a great opportunity in the world right now. There's a lot of things that aren't perfect, but that's not a problem. That's an opportunity. We have a stage set right now for us to go out and make changes, be active observers, choose love, move through our fears, and there's nothing that should be stopping us. Let's go do it. Are you on board?
I'm with you.
All right, brother.
100%.
Well, thank you so much for being here today. It's extremely important to have people like you come out and speak. You know, I love listening to your voice. I love the fact that you're out coaching, both physically and mentally and spiritually, because, you know, the answers are within, but we all need a little push. We all do. And I know you know that as well as I do. So thanks again for being here. Next week, we are going to have a great friend of mine. He's actually part of the Go Love Now movement. His name is Ty Sweet. He's a musician, a rapper, and an all-around amazing guy. So we look forward to seeing you next week. We love you all. Thanks again, Versell. Take care and go love now.